the next panel is Ending Pinkwashing. I would like to introduce our moderator, Nader Tavasoli, who is an LBS prof, as well as Peter Lewin from Levi's, Alex Dessa from Workin, and Elliot Vaughn from BCG. Let's put our hands together.
I think my mic is, yes, it's on. Just doing a sound check here. Hopefully you can hear me as well.
Okay. Oh, well, good morning, everyone. I think there's some students in here who see me live for the first time. I had the MBA class of 2022. I was the marketing professor in the core, and all they saw of me is this size. And yes, I am really this short. So welcome to this panel. I have some notes here, so I get everything right. So next to me here is Alex Dessa. She's the head of programs at Workin, who bring technology and people services to combine talent development and diversity, equity, and inclusion in order to cultivate belonging in organizations and networks. And Alex is also the CEO of House of Pride, which creates spaces and experiences for the queer community. So very interesting if you look that up online. Behind me, above me, towering above me is Elliot Vaughn, who is the managing director and senior partner at B&G. He's a global leader of Pride at BCG. He also founded EUROUT, which is an award-winning charity that enables individuals to support LGBT+ advocates around the world. And for this, he was awarded the Points of Light Award by the UK Prime Minister in 2019. He also serves as board director of Outright Action International, which is the leading international NGO focused on LGBT+ rights globally. And over there is Peter Lewin. I once did a video where I pronounced his name as Peter Lewin because he won a prize here as a student. And he's a senior director of global direct-to-consumer strategy, growth and investment, and global membership at Levi Strauss & Company. There, he also founded and sponsored Unlabeled, which is their LGBTQ+ and ally employee network outside of the Americas. So it's a great pleasure to be here. And I'd like us to start off, maybe with you, Alex, to tell us a little bit more about yourself and briefly provide, how would you define pinkwashing or rainbow washing, as it might be called as well, and why this is an issue?
Sure. Can everyone hear me? Is that mic? The green light is on. So if anyone can help, that would be great. Otherwise, I'll project because I'm also an actor, which is the first thing that I will introduce myself. So yes, I've been acting professionally for around about 7 years. So that's something I do alongside my many other jobs. I'm here in the capacity as head of programs at Workin, which, as Nada said, is a company that focuses on people development, specifically underrepresented groups, and combines technology and people services to accelerate those underrepresented groups in the organizations they work in and in the industry they work in as well. Got 2 people approaching me now. Slightly intimidating. And I am also co-founder and CEO of a company called House of Pride, which was already mentioned, which is actually focused on the queer, female, and non-binary community, because when myself and my co-founder founded it, we discussed the lack of spaces for that community. So our company is, this isn't going very well. Thank you, thank you.
She was projecting so much that it blew over the...
I feel like if I breathe, that's going to fall over.
It's going to fall.
Yeah. So that's what I do professionally. And then personally, my pronouns are she, her. I identify as a lesbian. and a South Asian woman. So all of those things and many more influence the work I do as well. In terms of pinkwashing or rainbow washing, I studied English literature and critical theory for a long time. And so my understanding of that is probably rooted in the political rather than the corporate. So where politicians and governments use essentially LGBT people and progressive policies on LGBTQ issues to mask undercurrents of violence in other areas. I won't go into examples unless you want me to, but that's probably my understanding of it. And then in terms of corporate life, so I used to work in financial services for a long time. So that's where I started off my career. And I do see it as companies really using the rainbow flag or using their spokespeople, tokenism almost, to mask internal terrible policies against LGBTQ people, to mask the lack of progression in that area, and sometimes even mask political agendas or political support for anti-LGBTQ ideology, and also other ideologies as well. So taking a pro-LGBTQ stance as a company whilst also discriminating against your Black employees, as an example. That's how I broadly see it.
I mean, the term was coined in a New York Times article in the political arena. So, so for you, it's a matter of basically of an intent to mask something else, maybe take attention away from it, either directly or indirectly connected to
yeah,
LGBT+.
Absolutely. At its root, I think it has taken on a broader meaning as well. But if anyone here, I'm presuming that a lot of you are academically inclined, has read Jasbir Puar's Rethinking Homo Nationalism, that's a really good place to start with pinkwashing for me, because it speaks to something a lot broader as well. It speaks to then sort of entrenching this idea in our society that the West or the Europeans are very pro-LGBTQ, and the East or the other is not. So it becomes broader than just one country and one government, and it speaks to something else.
Yeah. And Peter, why don't you follow up with the same? Tell us a little bit more about yourself and your view on the topic.
Sure. So since this conference is about intersectionality, I can share some of my intersectionality, which is Californian American, British English Londoner, cisgender, gay white male, well, mostly gay white male, of German and Russian and Lutheran and Jewish extraction. I think that's kind of like a nice little handful of kind of my background. There are other things as well, if you really think about the deep meaning of intersectionality, which also includes personal political affiliation philosophies and so forth. But that's broadly speaking my background, my identity. In terms of pinkwashing, I come at it from, I work at a brand called Levi's. So I think about it very much in terms of kind of the commercial aspect of it and what brands are putting into the market. And this year I was honored to serve as a judge for the British LGBTQ+ awards in the brand marketing campaign category. And what occurred to me when I was doing that work is, and I'm sorry, Elliot, I'm going to steal a BCG concept, which is like the 2x2 matrix. So you've got, on the one hand, let's say very targeted marketing, targeted channels, targeted audience. And then you've got general marketing, which you call about brand marketing, right? So that's stuff where you're sending messages out to the broader community to build awareness about your brand and to begin to build affiliations. And then you have kind of the internal side of what the company's doing, which is either they're not supporting the LGBTQ+ community, whether it's their people or the community, and they're not taking public stances, or they are. And I think what's easy for us all to get on side of or on board with is the idea that those folks who are marketing specifically to the LGBTQ+ community to get their, I was going to say dollars, pounds, euros, dollars, but they're not doing anything for the LGBTQ plus community. That, for me, I think we can all agree, is very clearly wrong, right? Like they're going out with an intent to take advantage of a community that they're not supporting, right? So that's, for me, very clearly the worst of pinkwashing. And it's probably the place where I stop being angry. Because if you think about brands that are, kind of broadly speaking, embracing the LGBTQ plus community in an authentic, normalized way, and they're saying that our brand includes these people, that by itself is a powerful and for the community, a really useful thing to be doing, right? And it suggests an intent that even if it's not yet backed up by internal actions, it's an intent to move the world in the right direction. So I have a harder time, don't get me wrong, I would still love it if they're also supporting the community, and ideally they should be, and ideally they'll find that they have to. But that broader kind of brand marketing, using LGBTQ plus people in a respectful way, I have a much harder time being upset about. And then you've got the other two categories where, I feel marketing to the LGBTQ plus community, if you're doing stuff for that community is okay, but much better to be taking a broader stance and helping other people in the world go on the journey to become much more inclusive themselves.
Okay. So it's a bit different. It's interesting if you think about marketing, segmentation, and targeting. This is an issue you don't want people just to segment and target specifically, but you're taking a broader stance, a moral stance in many ways. Very good. Thank you. Elliot, you're up there levitating above us. Say a bit more about yourself and this topic more generally about pinkwashing.
Yeah, thank you, Nada. And I wish I could have been there in the hall as well. I'm actually in a shed at my parents' house. We have a family event today. I've just heard my dad taking out the bins, so apologies for any noises off. I think you introduced me really well, and my pronouns are he, him, and
Elliot, could you hold on for a second? I don't think we can hear you very well. Can you guys hear? No. So maybe we can fix this sound.
Okay. I'd just do another a sound check. I don't know if that's better. That's better. Okay, great. Yeah, so I was just saying, wish I could be with you today. My pronouns are he, him, and your intro was great about me. I would also mention I'm the global leader of the Pride at BCG network. So also very pleased to see you all in person this year as well. So congratulations on today's conference. I think if I think about pinkwashing and why it's an issue, for me, a really important place to start is I think we're in an era where much of the work ahead of us as LGBTQ people is transforming the institutions that we're all part of to really address our needs. And that's businesses, that's the governments, that's the whether it's the army, whoever. And also mobilizing allies, civil society groups, business to improve human rights protections in the many countries of the world where it's still illegal to be LGBTQ. So in that context, it's actually really important for me that we grow the space for business to engage in our communities. And actually, there's a growing expectation on all businesses to be doing that. So the UN Standards of Conduct in 2017 said every business, big and small around the world, has a duty to be showing up for the community internally, but also acting in the public sphere. So what constitutes pinkwashing and why, and what is different from that? So I would propose some tests, and ideally, I would like to see, first of all, that the business is figuring out its values and is acting in a way that's grounded in its values. That it's starting with the foundations of internal inclusion, and doing that in the context of its overall ESG footprint, environmental, social, governance footprint as a firm. And then it's the right thing. And I think all businesses should be thinking about how to express those values externally and act in the public sphere. But at that stage, for me, the things I'm looking for are they taking care to ensure that the external perception isn't getting ahead of internal reality in their company? Are they taking account of their broader ESG footprint as a business in the world? Are they taking account of the global footprint of the business? And I think there's this concept that we found a give out of potentially pinkwashing at home, where businesses might march in the Pride in London, parade, but maybe not be showing up in the communities around the world where they also have a major footprint? And then, ideally, are they showing a tangible commitment to our community in terms of resources, multi-year commitment that's at least in proportion to any incremental profits they're making from our community? And I think it's even better when the thing they're doing externally is actually moving the needle forwards for LGBTQ people. And a great example that comes to mind for me is Lego, actually. And in the last year, we've seen this really cool Lego set, Everyone is Awesome. But if you try and buy that, you have to see a clear statement of Lego's values online. You get a link through to what they're doing internally to build an inclusive culture. You get a link through to see what they're doing to become a climate neutral environment, taking account of their environmental footprint. The Everyone is Awesome rainbow set is kind of cool. We all grew up, I think, wanting a queer Lego set. I did it at least anyway. And it's kind of quite a radical subversive thing to have a queer Lego set sort of that kids can play with, actually. And so I think that really is moving the needle forwards. And I won't embarrass Peter too much, but I think Levi's is actually in the same bucket for me in terms of clear values, grounded in internal foundations, grounded in the context of the broader environmental supply chain accountability. The product itself is an act of defiance and culture change, and it's accompanied with deep action in the community, where Levi's, I should say, has been donating to Outright Action International for multiple years, the profits from its Pride collection. So I think those are the tests that I would apply, Nada.
So it's very interesting. You touched upon many issues, and we'll dig deeper on some of them, I think. One being, I think, is you're talking about values, very hard to touch things. And unlike sustainability, you might say, well, let's look at our carbon footprint. We can kind of calculate that. So it's a very difficult decision to make. To what degree do you express something externally? At what point are you authentically doing so or allowed to do so? It's very hard to calculate that, I think, to get that right. Maybe just to follow up briefly on that with you, at BCG, do you have a metric like that? You said, we can observe certain things at Lego and so forth, but what's a score that you could apply in terms of when you become sort of a suspect of pinkwashing rather than just expressing your values?
Well, I wish I brought some slides with me, but we have been looking at a metric called total societal impact, actually. And for the reasons I gave, I wouldn't actually take only LGBTQ inclusion out of context of that total societal impact. But what we find is that the businesses that are doing the most authentically to respect their societal impact across all the dimensions of ESG are in fact also seeing a business case for doing that as well. So I think for me, I think it's really important that values comes first, actually helping people have fulfilling lives at work. This really matters to people, LGBTQ inclusion in the workplace. But I think it's also really clear that there is this mountain of evidence that individuals, businesses, cities, even countries achieve more and do better when they are included and inclusive, actually. So there's a huge evidence base that's supporting that now.
I'm going to take some of the things you said and maybe come to Peter in terms of, you called out Levi's for having taken a stance early in 1992. It was the first Fortune 500 company to extend advantages to same partner couples, for example. So so you've been at this for a long time. With Unlabeled, clearly, like with Lego, you have a clear, tangible focus. A lot of other companies and organizations, they do something during Gay Pride Month, for example. For that period, we change our logo, we say something like with COP26, everybody talks about sustainability, or Women's Day, we talk about similar issues relating to women and their role in organizations, society. Can you tell us a little bit more about Levi's and both not saying something during Gay Pride Month and saying something has, it can either be the accusation of pinkwashing as a global company. There might be repercussions, financial repercussions that investors might not be happy with in other parts of the world. Can you tell us a little bit more about your experience at Levi's around this topic?
Yeah, well, so I think to start, I'll say that, you know, I think we were probably one of the first corporates to be involved in Pride. You know, we had under Walter Haas and Bob Haas, who are both descendants of Levi Strauss, and Bob was the last family CEO, a really strong drive towards values-led behaviors around supporting the queer community and HIV, as well as same-sex partner rights. But you know, the reality is, you know, we are a global company, and there are some countries where we cannot, because of the law, we cannot have our Pride collection, and it's something that makes us really sad, and quite frankly a little bit angry, and especially in countries where, you know, like Hungary, you know, last year we could do it, this year we can't. And we don't want to put our colleagues at risk. So I mean, you know, my fundamental response to that is actually an emotional one, which is just really makes me angry. But you know, I think the reality is in those countries, you have to take a decision around whether you're going to stay angry, or if you're going to get even and you're going to try to, you know, somehow drive change. And if we were to, you know, pull out of countries, for example, where we couldn't, you know, really embrace all the values that we'd like to be able to embrace, we have no chance of driving change. We have no chance of supporting our people. And, you know, even if it's, you know, when the Hungarian legislation came in, we did what we could from a social media perspective. And with the Munich arena, you know, kind of debacle around UEFA refusing to light it up in rainbows, we actually lit our entire digital channels, and I think some of our physical footprint in rainbow with a very strong inclusive message, which is about all that we could do at the time. So, you know, it's sad, but, you know, the reality is you have to tailor your ambitions to what is legally achievable in each of those markets. And quite frankly, I'm glad, and, you know, thank you, Elliot and Nader, both for kind of mentioning the values that we have in our company. But you have to have such strong values like that to be able to take bold decisions like that and really stand by them, irrespective of what the commercial outcome might be.
Thank you. I'll come to you, Alex. We had a mention already of the pink pound or pink money, pink dollar, whatever you might want to call it. And you, Elliot, mentioned the commercial reasons for doing this, and not pinkwashing, just but the dark side is that you're exploiting and seen as exploiting the gay community, the LGBT+ community. What's your view on this?
So firstly, before I answer that question, I just want to pick up on a word that I think everybody else on this panel mentioned, which was authenticity. And I do think that maybe that should be in that measure as well. And something you were saying, you know, about Hungarian employees there as well. And you don't want to abandon them by divesting or not having operations in that country. But it's about, I think, engaging with those people and not relying on allies or people who are in danger of exploiting the LGBT community to make those decisions, to be the ones, be the only ones around the table when looking at marketing campaigns. In terms of authenticity, I think you really need to have LGBT people around the table, and LGBT people who look different as well and who are different. In terms of exploitation, I mean, it's a very strong word. And I think that what's already been mentioned is having a presence full stop in this arena, having a public, you know, rainbow on your logo is doing something. So it's going to shift the needle forward anyway if you have a presence. It might not mirror what you're doing internally, but you are making an external commitment. So I think sometimes it's a bit harsh to call it exploitation. However, when you look at cases like Facebook that had a pride reaction emoji and only released it to a certain proportion of their audience who their algorithm determined would react well to it, and then left it off for the rest of their audience, that is what I think is tantamount to exploitation, is because you're falsely making that stance. I do think there is a danger, though, when we talk about the pink pound, we are often talking about gay men and gay white men. when we're talking about double income. So the pink pound, for those of you who aren't aware, I'm presuming most of you are, is when you have a double income and, you know, historically, stereotypically, no children, no dependents. So you have a lot of disposable income to hand to spend a lot of money. That's why the house prices shot up in Brighton at one point. So the danger with looking at the pink pound and labeling everything pinkwashing is that we're ignoring everyone else in the LGBTQ community. And when companies are marketing commercially, you know, showing LGBT people, they're actually just showing white gay men, and they're showing the kind of palatable, fun, pride side of things, and they're not showing everything else. They're not showing queer people of color. They're not showing trans people. They're not showing lesbians, and that is what I think can be linked to exploitation, and people are starting to pick up on it now, bringing back to your point around intersectionality, Peter. And that, I think, can definitely damage a company's brand. I don't know if you have any experience of trying to incorporate multiple voices.
This is where the commercial motivation is larger than the moral motivation in many ways.
Yeah, I think they're linked.
So I think that's where intersectionality and authentic representation becomes so important. And you know, this is you know, only recently in the last year or two have people started publishing, and I think this is something as a community we've felt for several years, but only recently have people been starting to publish around the way we're a little bit tired of all the stereotypes that come across in the marketing, right? It seems like it's always the same kind of like 4 or 5 tropes that represent us as a community. And you know, there's some great work that's been done between, I think it's GLAAD and P&G, around authentic representation of, and what do they call it? I can't remember, it's something about voices. But you know, authentic representation of LGBTQ plus people. There's some great research that's come out of the Gina Davis Institute, which looked at the Cannes Lions and found that only 1.8% of people in ads in the Cannes Lions submissions were LGBTQ plus. Depending on where you are, that compares to, you know, 10%, 20%, 50% of the population. And so I think we're starting to get to the point of a more nuanced, granular understanding of how to incorporate our community, the way we actually show up in life. It's not all of the double income wealthy gays living in London or Brighton, right? It's, I mean, look at this room, look at how diverse we are. It's spectacular, right? How do we get that to come across? How do we get people to recognize every day and to include in their advertising every day, you know, that it's intersectionality, it's people living, it's people who happen to be LGBTQ plus, openly LGBTQ plus, living real lives. And that's, I think, the next frontier for inclusive advertising, and not just at Pride, right? It's not just at Pride, it's not just at Rainbow. It's not just rainbows. By the way, I just want to ask a question. How many people here, because this was a conversation we've had as a panel, so I'm just put out there, I don't wear rainbow. It's not my color palette, right? Doesn't work for me. Just out of curiosity, am I the only person here? Are there other people who just don't wear a rainbow? I mean, this was genuinely a conversation, yeah. Just clashes with my complexion, yeah. And look, it's like the rainbow symbol it's powerful, right? And I love so much of what it stands for. But I don't want to buy stuff that's rainbow. It's not my style. So, you know, I think that's another thing that we need to recognize. It's like, we're not all the same, and we need to embrace that diversity and that intersectionality in all of its myriad of wonderful ways.
So I'm going to open up to the audience if you have any questions, and I'll let you think about that for just a minute. And I'll pose one to the panel here, because I think you brought up a very important point in terms of, you know, the focus has been on gay men, even for Levi's. Traditionally, San Francisco, it's not surprising in many ways, whereas you're focused on gay women. And it's an interesting community. It's defined by its differences. So LGBTQIA plus, right? It's as much by its similarities and the differences between them. So it's an interesting community. And when we think about, and of course you can be gay and Black, or person of color. You can, so how is this community defined? And maybe sort of pinkwashing versus greenwashing, whitewashing, brownwashing. Are there fundamental differences, or is this all just, as Elliot, maybe we'll start you off, part of a general sort of social justice, ESG initiative? And then we'll go to the audience. And if you want to raise your hand so you can get the mic to ask any questions, we'll come to you then. Elliot, do you have something you'd like to say?
Well, I mean, it is an incredibly diverse community, looking globally around the world, and also a raucous, rambunctious movement as well, which I think is fantastic. It's one of the things I love about the LGBTQ community is how plural and diverse the voices are we have advocating in it. I also think it is really important to look not just at pinkwashing, but actually the overall footprint of the business that we're talking about, right? So, and one thing that really sort of annoys me a bit is when, you go on to see, what a company is doing and they're just talking about their work around LGBTQ topics, but actually assuming that I don't care about everything else they're doing in the world as a business. So I think it is really important. And I just maybe want to add to that word authenticity. I think, which Alex, I think you're right to call it out, but I think it's, for me, I put that also alongside intention and engagement. So when I see, a business doing something, and I think, well, I'm not really sure about that. You can either go, wow, that could be pinkwashing and sort of label it and move on, or you can engage and say, okay, well, it's great to see your commitment to our community. Great. Now let's talk about what are you really doing that is, internally creating a safe environment for your people, not just in your home market, but around the world. And how are you showing up in our community and in a way that is, again, not just, in your home market, where it's really simple and easy to do that. So I do think the choice there is whether to engage or whether to sort of label and move on. And I actually think what the world needs more of is really engaging with businesses to understand, how they can broaden and deepen their commitment, and rather than just these sort of Twitter battles, which kind of make you feel good for a day, but then really has it really kind of moved the needle. So I'm certainly on that side of the discussion, that I think if there is authenticity, there is a clear intention, they are willing to engage. I think that really counts for a lot for me, actually, because that's how we make progress as a community as well.
I didn't look at the audience during this. Was there a question from the audience? So I'll let you choose.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Gani. So I wanted to ask, so the idea of sustainability in general, and I suppose in particular linked to social justice, in your experience, how quickly do you think companies and organizations are understanding or coming on board with the idea of it's not just about your external actions, actually it's very critical what you do internally? And I guess the second part of that would be, and how difficult do you think it will be for organizations to get on board with that idea? Thank you.
Did you have a speaker you wanted to ask directly, or should we let the speakers decide?
It's Boston Consulting Group, isn't it? So I think you probably have, I'd imagine you probably have a lot of insight in terms of a broad range of organizations, but at the same time, I wonder if Levi's might also have an insight from being a sort of first mover.
Yeah, well, I would just really agree with the question, because as I said, at the beginning, I think you've got to start with the internal foundations, and that means getting the right policies in place. It means creating safety, psychological safety for staff, creating diverse recruitment pipelines, having gender supportive, affirmative healthcare policies, and not just doing that in your home market, but around the world. And then also moving out from the company wall, if you like, actually working in the supply chain, you know, and most businesses in the world today do have quite extended supply chains, and not just, you know, not just sort of deciding who to work with from a procurement perspective, but actually really engaging your supply chain partners to bring them on board to participate, do joint events in Pride season, or, you know, throughout the year, sharing best practices. There's so much potential there. And I would really say, from, you know, from a best practice perspective, you know, and Give Out actually did a study on this, looking, called Pride with Purpose, looking at how businesses should be engaging. And it's so important to start with that and not start with the external, where if you're going out into the market and sort of bragging about your external commitment to LGBTQ human rights and the market, without having done that work internally, I think it's really risky.
The thing with driving change, especially on this topic, is we're dealing with people. And everybody will have a different set of experiences. And when you're looking at large organizations that have been around for a really long time, even if they're bringing in new people, you've got to not work just on policies, right? Policies are super important, but really what you need to focus on is changing hearts and minds. And that's not super straightforward, because people learn in different ways, people communicate in different ways, they listen in different ways, they respond to different stories. I mean, yeah, in some of my experiences, you know, some folks will love to hear, that's the wrong word. Some folks will respond to really strong personal stories that are highly relevant and immediate. Others will respond to data. And, you know, it's a topic around speed. I would love to say that it's easy for every organization to move quickly, but the reality is it's not. And I think, you know, as we try to drive organizations forward, we need to recognize that people just take a little bit of time to learn, especially when it's something that you're asking them to learn and embrace on top of their day job. The greatest thing that we can do to act as change agents is to keep our eyes fixed on the direction of travel and to remain robust and resilient and resolute in the direction that we're trying to move. And then to be empathetic and to recognize that other people have different experiences, and they'll just take some time. Even the best intentioned people on the planet who just haven't had the right level of education will take a little bit of time to come around to new ways of thinking. So keep focused on the direction and keep being empathetic. Do not shut down conversation. Do not other the people you're trying to bring on board. Remember that we're all on the same side. At the end of the day, we will all be on the same side. And that's the intention with which we need to address the problem.
I'm keeping my eye on the clock. Maybe I'll just finish with you on this topic. I see you want to say something. And if you don't mind, I'd like to point out something that you said earlier. You're a woman.
I am.
You're a person of color.
I am.
And you're lesbian.
Yeah.
So there's three related issues here, and you feel almost marginalized as part of you know, the overall LGBT plus movement. So from your perspective as a minority almost within that movement, not almost, distinctly, in terms of attention, what's your view?
Yes. So my view, first of all, is that that's why I've created my own company and my own space, partly because I felt marginalized by the movement. And there are others doing incredible work in that space as well, UK Black Pride as an example. But in terms of the question that was asked, I think it's actually very dangerous when we're looking at internal versus external. And when we're just looking at policy, it can be really dangerous. And it's not just bad for the brand. It's not just bad financially. It can be really dangerous for actual people who work in the organization. So when we're focused on inclusive recruitment, for example, that was something that was brought up, an inclusive policy around recruitment, and we're not focused on what the actual culture itself is like within the organization, you're not only probably going to have quite a high attrition rate, but your employees can suffer with their mental health. can suffer in any next organization that they move on to, because they've been so damaged by what's gone on internally in yours. And it can be a terrible experience for people. And I've known people who that has happened to. At Workin, we do work specifically around mentoring and sponsorship programs, where a lot of the people who engage with these programs in organizations are at risk of leaving, and this is almost their last resort. And so I think just focusing on policy is probably, it's a great step. If your company hasn't looked at EDI before, bringing in someone to look at your internal policy it's probably where they're going to start. But it's around these other initiatives that people see as add-ons, that people see as nice to haves, like ERGs, like mentoring and sponsorship, like events that can showcase role models and stories. It's these things that actually build the culture in organizations. And then I just want to come to one final word, because I know we're at time. It's accountability. So I know we started off talking about authenticity, but ultimately people need to be accountable in these businesses for driving that culture change. And you were talking about intention, Peter. And it's great if everyone has positive intentions. That's what we want. We all want to work in a fairer society, and a society that values our voices. But if there is no one ultimately accountable, whether that's at a mid-level management or senior management, for driving that change, it's never going to happen. So I would encourage, basically, for me, it's authenticity and accountability. And as a marginalized person who has entered into a lot of these workplaces, we're just going to leave if things aren't right. So there's no point to all of the marketing and branding and pinkwashing on that side if you don't change anything internally.
It's actually a really nice place to stop. And just before we came into the room, so thank you for being here. Thank you for organizing this to the EUROUT team, and thank you for the panelists for joining. But one of the things we mentioned is, if you claim fair trade credentials, so greenwashing, there's increased regulation that comes back, and you're being called out for it. So accountability also goes back to that earlier point on measurability. And the internal culture, the values, the lived experience, if you're a marginalized person, I think it's very difficult to quantify, but it's very real nevertheless. So thank you, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you.